Okay. Sorry, just got to get the right board. I think I'm just going to go to our Slack channel and time tracking. Someone put up a Miro link. I'm just going to search for that. Sorry, Phil, a bit of a late start today.
No, it's all good. I was doing some Security Plus review for a remote opportunity that I've got.
Yeah, all the opportunities are remote these days, it seems.
Yeah, until COVID-19.
Yeah. All right, let's see what's the latest one. April 15th, I think, is the first one we had this. Oh, no, it was Alex Gemmel that did this board. So I'm going to share my screen and just let me know if this works or not. Settings. Phil, did you have a chance to scour the time tracking channel in the event modeling Slack?
Honestly, no.
Okay, so maybe if some people can repost the links or pin them to that. Are they pinned at the top of the conversation, Rick? I'm not sure if they are. But
yeah,
good to do
so
some house cleaning.
I found out about this. I saw one of the posts in LinkedIn, and I'm a very big proponent, of DDD, event modeling, event sourcing. And
Great.
So basically it's just very few opportunities to actually work with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, cool. Let me, if nothing else, is more than anything else, just to do some lurking and some learning.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be we'll be good.
Don't be shy. You don't need to worry about lurking. Just jump in and ask questions.
Yeah,
so maybe one of the things that you'll notice is what we've done is to go back to Adam's decided to take this. We did a bit of event storming,
okay,
right? And kind of event modeling and kind of model out the system roughly,
right?
And then decided to dive in to implement some of the pieces with some different stacks, so we can get end to end quickly. Okay. Knowing that full well that our model is incomplete,
right,
and probably incorrect, and Adam's goal was to say, like, it's okay to get it wrong. It's not that expensive, and we're going to prove that by doing this. Multiple technologies, getting in, and then realizing that, oh crap, we didn't model that right. We'll just fix it,
right?
And to show that, so that's kind of that's one of the experiments we're doing here. Is to show that we don't have to be perfect modelers and model everything up front. If we get it wrong, we can adjust. It's not that expensive.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the whole thing behind it? Agile and Scrum in the first place.
No.
Get 80%. Get along the path.
The problem
is, I mean, it depends what you're talking about, right? If you're like for a startup, absolutely, you don't even know your own domain really. Right. So you're really always trying to have a discovery phase of what's going on with your market and how you're fitting into it. But now compare that to another company which is established, like a trading company. They have very clear idea of what must be sent to as an order to the New York Stock Exchange or whatever. So they have to get that right. And this is kind of where you use the same mechanics, but you need to be on, or you risk the restart of a project and wasting a lot of things. And if you don't get it right, there's severe financial penalties to the point where you can go out of business. So the nice thing is that event modeling allows you to have that, hold it up to the light. Is what we're doing still on track to meet this goal of having information change this way over time? And one of the things that, since you are familiar with DDD and everything like that, it would be good to have that discussion of how you model some of these DDD specific things. And one of the things that happens in domain-driven design and event sourcing is how do you track invariance over time? So we have these given when-thens, for example, for a read model, where we can have a whole bunch of events happen, more and more happen, and we show how a specific view changes as each new event gets added. It nicely translates to these unit tests that we can directly go and implement, and that should give us the behavior in our screen that we desire. Some of the more intricate things are with invariants that go across entities, and so that's what I want to do. I'll give a background as to our approach here, how we're kind of gluing things together. And I'm glad that some people have changed some of this, but I'm just going to go to a new area here, and I'm going to show a couple of events. Oops, there we go. Those are just guides. So if I'm going to look at an event, I'm going to make it yellow and slightly see-through. And then, oh, actually, I do want to have this for an event. And I don't want it to be that wide. Yes, okay. Width, please. The problem with this large monitor is that the resolution is too high. Let's see. Makes me want to draw smaller things. Delete that guy. Oops. Not that. Delete that guy. Let's start over again. Okay. So an event could be, let's say, order submitted. That should be submitted. And obviously we have some order ID, have some products, quantities, user that's doing that, etc. And if we have a whole bunch of these, let's say we're in a regulated industry, we have a stipulation that we can't have more than 10 outstanding orders. This is what's called a cross-entity invariant. It's easy to have given when-thens, the traditional given when-then that Greg talks about. Given some events for one particular order, when I try to close it or finish it, I can fail if I don't have some criteria done. Otherwise, if I do have that criteria, it successfully completes, and as such makes one more event that gets put on into the ledger of events. So if we do this one, I can just do that again, and we pretend that we have submit order. A happy case is that we have yet another submitted order with the appropriate information in it. So that's your typical given when then that we have. So I'm just going to make a note of that. And then just make that nothing. This is given these things happened. And then over here, when this happens, then this is recorded. This is the holy grail of all this event sourcing stuff, is that we can have real life scenarios sitting there at the same level as the code. So when we're talking about our solution somewhere, we can point directly at the code and show where these things are happening. Just change it up a bit. So that makes sense. However, in this case, when we get into the implementation, we hit a roadblock because these are separate aggregates if you're using DDD terminology. And when you're hydrating your aggregate to get all these previous events go in, they don't belong to this aggregate. So if we have an invariant saying we can only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can only have 8 orders as a maximum. Well, at this point, we already have that. So I'm just going to turn off these things here so we don't get distracted. Duplicate this, put it underneath. And like I said, we have an extra one of these. Oops. Then we have a failure. Too many orders. So when it comes to implementation, I want to make sure I'm not missing some important. Sorry, just seeing if I'm missing something important on our Slack, because I keep hearing alerts. I should just probably mute those as well.
Someone was asking on the Slack about the link, but I'm answering, so.
Oh, okay, great. I should just then, if you're taking care of that, I'm just going to mute this. Where's our mute button here? Invite, pause notifications, 2 hours is fine. Okay, cool. So this makes sense, right? So we have the happy path, but then here we show, business understands this, right? Too many orders. We have 8, right? When they see this in our build up in what we've done here before, in some of these scenarios, we understand what is happening at this point. When it comes to implementation, we get to this problem with having this aggregate that exists for all these orders. So each one of these lives as a separate entity. And so the events, these events that are happening in and around in the same domain, end up being really not something that you can hydrate with. So generally what happens is we need to take the previous events and make a specification for a view. And this view will be current outstanding orders. And it's a projection of all of these different aggregates and what they're publishing. And this is a given when, a given then. And this type of specification is the given then without the when, because it's passive. It has to accept those previous things. We've been over this multiple times. And I can change the phrasing just a little bit. And oh geez, I hope I'm recording this. Good God. There's a new computer, so it might not be.
Yeah, it's showing recording.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. So this is what happens when we have this invariance. So when we show to business that's given when then, they're quite happy with these two. But in the implementation, what really happens is this submit order needs to have a new input on this command. And really it's gelling these two together, which means we have the same, in implementation, we have the same thing. However, here what we have is current outstanding orders, which is a collection. I guess we can just do some convention like this should do. And really, we can also bold it because it is something that is dependent on these other external things. So I'm just going to put that as bold. And when it comes to implementation, this could be just an entire green that gets associated with this. And it's important to show that each one of these gets included with that. And so we can do that for all of these. Make this kind of nice. It's looking a little ugly, but whatever. And so the question here is, in terms of implementation and showing things, I think it's absolutely critical for business to understand that this command is based on providing the input from all these other previous events that have happened. And this coupling is really key to making business understand that when they change something here, this has implications. For example, if we somehow do some new version which has in it, let's say a submitted order can count as 2 orders, right? That's going to impact this. And if our previous implementation just simply had the raw count of this because we didn't have the the read model as being the input, does that satisfy us? So there's an interesting thing that I've been playing with to make sure that we have this playing well with the specification and with the implementation. And that's the idea that when we specify these read models and they're going to be used for invariants for subsequent state changes, that we really need to improve this to have some of this raw data available. Let's move ourselves out of the way here. And the way that we would do this, I'll zoom in on this part, is current outstanding orders count, and we would have equals 7. And by the way, we also have this is based on these orders. And here we have, now this is obviously going to inflate how much storage space we have, but hopefully not. And with closing of the books and other things like that, we will have these things trimmed down to a dull roar. So past relevant events. So
So you're saying you're going to list it not based on a list of order IDs, but based on the events.
I'm just going to include the events as part of that read model so that I don't have to look at the events again if I want to find the exact events, because I may be interested in those events for these invariants that I need to provide for a command. In other words, I can imagine a command that can accept a current view, as we call it in event modeling, as one of the parameters to the command that encapsulates all of this information. However, there may be situations in which there's a specific detail provided in here that would also be helpful in here. So I don't know if this is a clumsy shortcut to get at the events, or if it's actually a relevant piece of breadcrumbs that we have in the view to show, especially when we're using it as an invariant for too many things. So this we can also show to business the coupling with both of these things, that we are going to be using the same thing here. And it's more important on the actual event model itself in here when we have some of these commands coming in that are based off of a previous view, that we understand, and maybe this is something that we can show, that it's not just a visual cue, but if there is an invariant that's cross entity, we may need to do something like this. To make it painfully obvious where your coupling is. So this is a consideration that I've been looking at as we, the core goal of event modeling is to have this picture of I'm storing these things and people are looking at these things. If we satisfy these things, we are happy at the end of the project because we are getting the expected result. However, when we're digging in to showing the coupling explicitly for implementation purposes so that people don't get lost, like if I change this, do I know that my command is going to get affected if I just have it implicitly going here? So one of the things Greg Young always teaches is make the implicit explicit. And so if I see a red arrow going to one of the commands that I'm working on, I need to be careful as to who is working on this particular view and understand that if they change something, or if there's a discussion about the workflow that hits this, that it's going to impact what I have to rely on. I think this is quite important because we do this with traditional systems based on how we share different fields in a database, right? Just to remind people how that's done, I'm just going to go in, open up a new tab here and go into eventmodeling.org, and I'm going to turn off my night vision here. Off. Zoom in a bit. But if we go to the traditional systems link, we'll notice that the coupling is very evident in traditional systems by having a particular field being reused by different parts of the workflow. And so what we have now is a way to where we were kind of free of this bad coupling in traditional systems. We still have coupling in our event sourced systems, but they're done through these invariant opinions where you're coupling separate entities together. Ideally, we want the given when thens to be entirely, nice, pure functions that don't require anything external. So, yeah, we would have kind of made assumptions, bad assumptions about how we can have something entirely independent where if we follow the trail of the data, I think over here we would have to have one extra step. And where was, I had another Miro board where I started doing this as a, oh, here it is, where I started doing this by showing which parts of the UI is going to be using that information. Now over here, they're entirely not related. This is something that I worked on just offline in terms of modeling how we're going to do our time tracking thing by showing, you know, how we enter one thing and then it shows earlier today. So it's a nice, helpful UI for being able to enter in your time. But you notice that these are somewhat unrelated, i.e. it's not an invariant that we impose on the command later, unless we, you know, evolve this into having something that that limits the amount of hours we can log for a day. Then we'll certainly start to have this link that we are getting this invariant, and we could either show that here, or if we want to be more business friendly and not bog them down in the how with these reports or views, and these commands are really the how, the what. So if they see something and we make the invariant explicit to the user, it should be shown in the UI to make their user experience better. It's like, oh, why am I getting a rejection for my you know, for my hours that I'm submitting here? That may be because I've gone over the limit for the day. It would be nice if I had clues from the UI and have nice friendly UX to show that. So perhaps this is where, you know, some of that view, instead of the actual view green sticky goes, it can actually go in here. Does that make sense? If that becomes an invariant to the amount of hours, we could show that here. And we may want to color code it because it's quite important. These cross entity things are usually heavier, have a heavier impact. So we may want to crank up the thickness and make it in red that we do have an invariant here. Of course, we'd have to repeat it here. Or is that too much? Or do we show it for the user, since we're getting it from the UI, do we show it on the submission button of the actual logging of the time? I prefer this because we're still getting kind of this nice sine wave of how our minds and eyes follow information as we move across time. So that's what I wanted to start off today with, is this very important piece that ties traditional and event source systems of how you can use the event modeling method to show that important coupling. That when business people are throwing requirements at you in what seems a random fashion because they had a nice dream last night about what the system should be, you have to show them what the impacts are. So Phil, maybe a question for you. Is this helpful as a first-time listener on this meetup? Or is there questions that you may have? Sorry, you're muted still, Phil.
Yeah, no, trying to, wrong screen. No, I mean, it's good. You know, you brought up the whole thing of rejection, you know, because then, you know, from a business perspective, I'd be looking at saying, okay, you know, do we reject the submission, or is it kind of in a pended state where there has to be someone else to either approve it or reject it because maybe for whatever reason that day I had to go over hours? How would that be considered?
Well, yeah, we're definitely that's further along, and Rick definitely and Krzysztof and others have talked about the acceptance part, which is here, right? This accept reject here. We will get into that, but yeah, do we get into that earlier? So okay, I'm guessing you understand what I'm talking about. So this is not a big deal.
So Adam,
yeah,
this is Rick. So I do like the idea of making the linkage explicit, right? If you go back to your example, is that view is actually being used by two things.
Yes.
Right? That view is being used by the UI, but it's also being used by the command to
Mhm.
in some way to validate the command logic, right?
Yes.
So making that explicit is great.
Yeah, you could even
Um,
label these things, right?
yeah, and I did
You
note.
you I mean, you can get really neat stuff in here where these red arrows are maybe a legend, and you can have a listing of your invariants, right?
Yeah.
I can list out for this arrow, this could be arrow number 2, and obviously number 2 is going to be here as well.
So I guess my question is, do we need anything more than a same colored link where this link is being used, this view is being used by a UI and it's also being used by command? Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I don't want to get too crazy and have too many rules for event modeling. I think at the core, we want that really simplistic event modeling for people to get started with and draw these same conclusions themselves. But as they dig in and want to make some of these things more explicit, they can go ahead and add that. And if we have some recommendations that, you know what, if you're going to be using it for the UI and it also happens to be a constraint, then you want to show that here. And maybe when something isn't shown to the user and it's done behind the scenes, then maybe the arrow does belong down here.
Yeah, I think the thing is, it's the views probably being used by the GUI, right? So that red arrow that you have there, if it's being used by the GUI, the arrow should be in the GUI. If it's being used by the actual command on the back end to process it, it should be pointing to the command. That's kind of what I feel like. Hey, this command
Well,
depends on
I'm
it.
hoping that this red arrow allows both, because when we hit this button, that's when we send the command. So
Right.
this implies that it's being used not just in the UI, but it's also used as this.
Well,
Well,
to me, that might imply that it might actually be used in the GUI to say whether or not you can click that button. Like,
yeah, I mean, of course you could. Yeah,
so what I'm saying
absolutely.
is, if
So
it's used by the backend
yeah,
command,
yeah,
it should directly point to the command. Be explicit.
yeah,
That's what my feeling is.
yeah.
Just my
I
opinion.
agree, and I think we can have another point here where we could have these as, you see how I have pre-populated some stuff that I'm assuming that this is what the user is typing in, but I could also have this whole process broken up into two pieces. I'll organize this later, but the command is actually getting done at this point. And I'm going to change some things, such as have nothing here, but I'm going to change these ones. Can I do more than one? Yes, okay.
So
just let me finish my thought, Rick, and we'll analyze this. Because if I pre-populate some time to, let's say, if it's the afternoon, I most likely will finish my day. Maybe this is a really helpful UX for people that if I'm logging time in the afternoon, I already filled up half my time. It's likely going to, or if I'm logging the time after 5, it'll do the remaining hours for the day here. So it might give me, 2.75 or whatever. Or 2.5, whatever, right? Whatever is left in the day. I'm just arbitrary, right? But if I'm doing this later, it means that most likely you're going to do the previous thing and you're going to be doing it from the last time that you stopped, and it's going to be for the remaining part of the day, right? Maybe let's just make it realistic and make it, 7, right? 7, right? So it's very helpful, but if I'm actually using it, I end up doing this. And this is where we may not do this, but we certainly have to show that this is also being used to do all of that, this whole area. And we might actually have this area highlighted in green and highlighted in blue for when you're actually sending the command. So this shows that we're pre-populating the information, but only when we have the command submitted, we show this link here. And this draws out our our invariant a little bit more explicit. It's always good to be more explicit. It can be a little pedantic or whatever, pedantic and OCD, but does that make sense, Rick?
Yeah, let me just show you what I mean quickly on that screen. So what I'm saying is, it's great. You can point in the GUI, you can show either just link to the box in the GUI and say roughly that UI depends on it, or link to the element in the GUI. That's kind of depends how specific you want to get. But more importantly, what I'm saying is, what should happen is this link right here.
Sorry, I got to turn on my indicators.
I just added a link.
Yes, no, I agree. Yeah, we should.
That's the one I'm saying is explicitly, when I click log on the server side, log time is going to check hours reported.
Yeah.
And accept or reject based on that some magic way.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I want to know, is that I will affect the back end processing of log time if I affect that view.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
exactly.
yes, I affect the GUI and I affect the back end processing.
Yeah.
They both depend on that. So that's what I was saying.
I agree. I agree. My only worry, and why I was hesitant to just go ahead and recommend it, is I don't want to overcomplicate and have too many arrows as a requirement for the practice, right?
Yeah. What I'm saying is,
so that's all. I mean, I totally think what you're talking about is valid, and yes, I agree. This is much better and more explicit, and shows exactly what's going on.
And at the same sense, you only show the errors that matter. So you don't necessarily need to show them all if they're kind of not that important, right? So yes, they may be dependent on a view, but it's not important to mention. So you just check the code, you'll see it. But if it's something that's critical, a business rule that needs to be highlighted, then you should put the arrow in.
And I mean, because we've been practicing this for 5 years now, really. I think with one of our projects 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, I believe, we became so used to this that by convention, just because we were really in charge of a lot of the requirements internally, the client trusted us with that. We omitted almost all of the arrows. I mean, we had no arrows. We had events and read models and UI without any arrows going across time, because that was and we could just test the solution in the implementation, whether it's actually doing this or not. And that was enough for us to charge the client by piece of functionality. So in other words, every single read model and every single command/event that it ends up being stored as, all those pieces were the granules for charging the client for functionality, and it worked out incredibly well. So I'm guessing event modeling is really it needs to be more explicit for people to get used to it and see the purpose in this kind of way, and allow people to see the different possibilities for the different purposes that this can be used for. For example, if we have some SLAs that we need to satisfy for how long it takes to, to have something last for, how long we wait for a page, like these time entry things should be quick, right? So it'd be really annoying if we're waiting for a long time. So on the timeline, I can say, somewhere here, and add some text. Now it's too large. And we can also make it stand out. You can say within 2 seconds. 2 seconds might be a lot, but maybe we're a remote team across the ocean, so we don't want to have an impossible. Right, we can do that, right? So, and maybe there's vertical lines to kind of attach the beginning and the end of this arrow to. And so anytime that we're looking on a timeline and there is something important, you know, we can see quite explicitly that that is within 2 seconds, or, you know, maybe that backdrop's kind of ugly. Let's just get rid of that.
Yeah, you might want to say that from the time this command is clicked, you expect the view to be updated within 2 seconds, right?
Yeah. So we can do those types of. I'm actually, you know, what would be nice just to show the time span is probably just get the same type of arrow on the other back end. So that gives a real, you know, if you drop these in onto the event model in a number of places, you're going to have quite an easy to understand satisfaction criteria. I recently started talking about ignoring the details of the how. You know, I think we have to continue with one more piece here for this part that I showed. Sorry for switching. So I just wanted to show the impact of what I'm talking about on the actual happy path and other paths on the event model with the actual specifications that we want for this stuff, right? So the other idea is, you know, how in the implementation, this is a standard practice, how do we, when we have two of these things happening at the same time, someone submits an order at the exact same time, is that going to be, is having 8 or 9 outstanding orders okay? And it's just a guideline, or are we going to be penalized by the FCC if this happens? So it's totally up to the domain as to what happens when two of these things are happening at the same time. And, you know, I get a stale version of this because it hasn't updated. The other one went through, and there is an 8th order now that happens. So these are the same problems, like make sure that there's, you know, I have the unique email, etc. Sometimes I just ignore that. Whoever had the same email and made it in just after you and all happened within first seconds, well, then obviously if they're able to verify their email within the next 2 minutes, they actually have that email. I'm not too worried about those kinds of problems. I think this is the same realm of, I want my, you know, monthly sales report and I want it to be up to date to the second, right? It's just a useless requirement. I want everything now. I want things to be faster than speed of light. Those are ridiculous requirements. And so we have to be explicit about what we do. And if we do have, we will be charged $100,000 if there's at any point 8 outstanding orders because we're a regulated industry. You need to then have a reservation system that staggers the eventual consistency problems of this. In other words, you have a reservation system of how many current reservations there are. And you cannot go in and have something, you need to have, first of all, an aggregate that takes care of that concurrent reservations number, because that's where you can serialize all the state changes to that. So this isn't going to solve this invariant when you slice it up with the fact that you're eventually consistent. If this is all running on Commodore 64s very slowly, there's definitely a high chance that you're going to have multiple infractions of this, right? So,
can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
If I wanted to impose consistency.
Oh, hey Peter, you made it.
yeah, woo! Thanks so much, Rick, for getting me in here. If I wanted to impose some sort of specific consistency in an area, could I put like a version number, like an optimistic concurrency version, on some of the views, and so when my command goes in, it would check to see that, yeah, you've got the latest version. I'm not going to steamroll something if I go and.
I don't think it's doable with views because of caching and things like that. You need to have an entity that can be pinned to the compare and swap operation. For if you have an absolute invariant, you have to have something that's a compare and swap. The other problem is that views can't reject something. So I can show you that you have more than, you know, the allowed number of of outstanding orders, but they can't do anything about it. And by the time you have that view, when you're using that view, you might have a stale version of it. And so you're, for the most part, yes, this works. This is just fine because we're not dealing with Commodore 64s. We're dealing with really fast machines, especially during the initial phases of a startup or whatever. You don't have, you have a good problem if you have too many orders coming in. But these are things that you don't have to be pedantic about. You need to have, and if it is a showstopper, you need to have a separate reservation system. So for my current, client or whatever, they only have 8. So you can have some sort of an aggregate that compares them to that.
So Adam,
yes.
In that to follow up on that question, so if you look at the given then projection that you have just above there, right, on the screen, right? Mm-hmm. That would actually probably be dependent on another set. Like you've got orders submitted, right? But you probably ought to have like order fulfilled.
Yeah,
order delivered.
Yeah. No,
right?
This is a very quick example to show the fastest way to get to this. But yes, this would obviously decrease as you fulfill orders, and you can then place new ones.
Right.
Yes.
So let's assume we had orders fulfilled, just whether it's right or wrong, also in there, right? Mm-hmm. So in my view, would I, do you do things like the view would include the event ID of the last order submitted and the last order fulfilled, upon which it made that view. So basically, here's the latest. My information is based on this latest information. So now it essentially would be a versioning, but something that's referencing the single source of truth from which it got that information. Based on this latest order submitted and this latest order viewed or latest order fulfilled, this is my answer.
Yes,
you have a better way of doing that.
But when you have 2 of those things happening at the exact same time, does that help you? Like another browser doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. They're both seeing that truth.
Right.
So you end up having both new events happen and be successful because they're based on these as the invariants.
Right, I see.
So you cannot get out of this situation. You need a second aggregate because this is very important for the business. Like it means $100,000 each time down the drain, and then after it happens the 5th time, you got to go out of business for you got to shut your doors for 3 days until you can fix the that, and that can ruin the business. So highly regulated industries, this is a non-negotiable. Now it does introduce extra programming and extra systems that have to run, but essentially what you're doing is you're creating another aggregate, and its projection may be the one that you use because it's the one that's trustworthy, right? So it would be a reservation number. The only way that you can do these things is through the idea of having a successful registration. The registrations are serialized in the word, not to make things into readable ASCII, but serialized as an ordering, that one reservation at a time is being allotted for you, right? So it would be we're bold again here. Get reservation for order, and this is quite a common. This is a very, very common pattern for event source solutions of how you get invariance in, and it's always this reservation as a 2-step process for anything that you want. It's kind of like a different type of 2-phase commit, if you will, but it's where you're explicitly saying where you need those 2-phase commits, which allows you the rest of the system to really act on a not an acid basis, but on a base basis if you're talking about concurrency and things like that. So get reservation for order, right? And here we may have something like my unique reservation ID. And what we end up with is, yeah. This is not complete by any means, but you can add the appropriate things. So reservation for writer obtained. Right, and this is just one aggregate that's kind of like your singleton for your domain, if you will, that's going to have, you know, all the different previous ones in there. So we can have a number of them beforehand. And then this is our given when then again for this reservation system. And this is where you show the failure of having more than 8. That is an absolute no-no. Because when I have outstanding reservations, for example, I might have an expiry. This is kind of like leases and things like that. So if I have a view of all of these, something like that, then we have our view, excuse me. Then we have our view that's a little bit better. And in this case, we can copy this and adjust it to use the proper one, okay, where we don't have this problem. That's not COVID, that cough, by the way. At least I don't think it is. Just in case you're worried. And did we have a proper one? Yes, we did. Thanks. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Adam?
Because this is based on the same thing. This is based on this, which has to be changed, right?
So
like this is not correct anymore, right? I don't have to look at all of the orders previously. I just have to look at the active reservations. And if I want to be explicit about that, I need to have this, right? And the other one on the flip side, again, these reservations will listen to events that finish things off, etc. So, oops. Bad.
So Adam, what would really help me in this situation is, because you're explaining a business rule here, is to have a little note beside this diagram that says, like, here's the business rule. That this.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
And so I think that's what's missing in your head.
Yeah, we will definitely have that. And these are not properly organized. When I organize these in the build-up scenarios, you can give a nice title to the whole swath of these given when-thens that says, here is the 3 business problems that we're solving. We can't have more than 8 hours in a day logged by anyone. We can't have 8 outstanding orders at a time, but it can happen, right? We can show that two people did that. And the nice thing about SLAs and those two things happening at the same time, Rick, is that you can show it in here. So because we have these timelines and we have, let's say we want to show that it's possible to have 9 outstanding orders because of our eventual consistency. This is where you can start to measure the diagonals of these lines. And I think this is where you can start to use straight lines, where on a timeline, you can show 2 users hitting the button at the exact same time. And notice by following the lines, if you just keep cutting this diagram vertically, that this is why this person saw that they're able to put that order in. And this is how 2 events happened at the same time when only one was allowed. And so that's quite interesting that with these things, if you start to move these arrows for those SLA purposes to be straight lines and literally put a time within seconds or whatever onto when people are seeing things and hitting things with buttons, you can show your eventual consistency compromises, if you will, or just where you don't care. Maybe it's just a store that's trying to make sure that the workers aren't too busy. It's not going to really cause any issues if they're going to have at one moment in time 9 outstanding orders instead of 8, right? But in a regulatory thing, you move to the reservation system, and they'll get penalized if there's 9 outstanding orders for that security or whatever. So with the SLAs, you might obviously move this to be attached to the entire screen, unless these things get populated through some sort of RESTful API call instead of single page app or whatever. But you want to show the timeline quite explicitly that 2 people did this at the same time. Here's why 2 events ended up in the stream, but it's okay. And it shows if business is wondering about that, maybe they just really don't care. A lot of times they'll say like, just make sure there's not more than 8. And then when you ask, well, what happens if sometimes 9 or 10 come in? It's like, as long as it's less than once a week, that's fine. You can show them mathematically based on the usage distribution that's got a 1 in a million chance of happening, and ask them if they want to spend 10K developing that reservation system just to make sure that 1 in a million thing doesn't happen. And you have to ask them, what is the repercussion when that does happen? Do we have a significant problem? And most likely the answer is no, and they just don't want to spend that money. They'd rather spend that 10,000 on another feature.
Yeah, and they usually end up spending, you could just spend you could spend like much less money on the recovery feature, which is identify when it happens and then just notify the person and have someone manually deal with it, right? Or
oh, of course, yeah. I mean, that's Greg's answer to a lot of these things is like, this is where you shuffle it off to a manual process because it's way cheaper than developing an entire $200,000 system to handle that situation. And you'll be it's the same thing that he says about winning a brand new car if something like that happens.
So in the example you were putting there, right, you didn't finish that example, right? Like, so when you put active reservations, really that last one down there where you have the thing reservations for order obtained and then active reservations, like,
which
do
one?
you really like submit order? Wouldn't that just pass the reservation ID?
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
So it doesn't,
I mean, this would obviously have a reservation ID to be able to do it properly. So
right. So you wouldn't need the direct linkage to active reservations because you just have a reservation ID, and the command that gets reservations for order.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the example because you hadn't quite finished it.
What happens when it's an external system that's tracking that reservation?
I don't know. It's a good question.
You're gonna have to have a way to represent that, and you can't have the events from an external system. It's always a projection of them, right? So even if you just show, like before, a whole collection of relevant, that's fine too, right? But the reason is that's the reason I'm showing them that it's linked to this, because business needs to know that why this is happening and how we get that information into the system, where the information lives, and all those ties, right? But
Right.
yes, for implementation, you might short circuit it. And this is the thing that, I was thinking a lot of times, I do want to take the short circuit, and maybe an implementation I do, where I literally take all of these things here and just leave it at this, right? This is your, but I don't like given when thens where the givens don't have the relative events unless this part is added. Remember, I could have active reservations without this, right? This would still work, but am I getting the context? I'm not.
Yeah. So
this is much more clear as to why things are happening the way they are.
Yeah. I think I lost it a little bit there, because what I'm looking at is,
well, this active reservation is just going to be a number, right? And what if there's some interesting things?
Right. But so maybe I don't understand your example. So since I have a reservation ID, like there's something, this get reservation for order gives me a reservation ID. And then I would use that in my submit order.
That's right.
So in submit order, I don't need active reservations because I have a reservation ID in this example that you have here. Right. Maybe you're mixing two examples, or maybe I just lost the plot. That's what I'm trying to get.
No. I think it's just a bad explanation on my part.
Okay.
Yes, you're right. There's probably redundant things over here. I'm more interested in showing the mechanics of making given when then. I should probably have, there's always situations where you will be in a place where you can do this, or you can do, what I showed last time. You can do this. So now, how do these two different specifications how do they help you or not help you, both in the implementation and in the model? I mean, is it more succinct and better to use this, the bottom one here? Or is it better to be explicit here? And, maybe it's the type of team you're in and the type of company you're dealing with, or the type of domain you're dealing with, where one might be better than the other. You might find that this is too wordy and you're actually getting lost in the fact that there's all of these and there's no need to show the intricacy of data variation in one of these things. And so it's useless and you go for the bottom one. However, maybe some of these orders maybe it's not reservations, right? Maybe it's number of products, right? So it might be the number of products that's outstandingly in the orders and you have to do some calculations. So it really depends.
Adam, couldn't you just produce a secondary, more detailed relationship as necessary? Do you have to, and this is coming from a lack of experience with, event modeling, do I have to show everything on this one view the way we're seeing it now?
Oh, like the fact that we have everything here?
Correct.
That's a major event modeling advantage, is that you're not managing multiple documents if you don't have to. Okay. So in other words, obviously I made these way too big, and these should be, this whole thing should be shrunk down to be a reasonable size, not this obnoxious size. Let's do that right now, just so we have an example that's kind of using the same font as the other stuff. And just put it here as what we did today. We can probably put a frame around it. Sorry, everyone has to move back up. I just moved everything. But the idea is that it's just like a blueprint for a house. You're literally unrolling a giant piece of blue paper on a large table as you're building the house. And you don't want people that have their hands dirty to have to flip through a bunch of documents and pages. And that's one of the reasons that blueprints are up on walls and people use it as a guideline. And I think that's largely missing in software, this same idea. So
yeah, but at the same time, you wouldn't have your wiring blueprint, your electrical blueprint on the same thing as your concrete rebar blueprint on the same thing as your plumbing blueprint?
Well, you certainly would have a blueprint for where all those things intersect, because I, as a plumber, definitely want to know where I can work without getting zapped.
Yeah.
Right. So yes and no. And yeah, for a large high rise, you will have multiple pages of these things, and probably you will have a master one, but then you'll have one that's specified. You certainly can make projections off of an event model to take those concerns, but I do want a master event model that does show SLAs, security issues, and other things on the same thing, so that I can see where they're related. And that's
True.
why
Yes.
and that's really key. And I know as a UX person, I can kind of ignore the stuff down here. I will look at it from time to time to see if I'm information complete, but I'm really, focused on, hey, these screens suck, and how is this going to work when someone doesn't remember what they did yesterday? Why do we not have last workday and earlier today on that screen instead of just these blank text fields, right? As a UX person, I can go and work in this area really unaffected by what's going on down here when people are implementing stuff and they see that they have to provide a new parameter to a command or something. But I can always hold it against the light and use this as a medium to exchange information with people from other teams with other disciplines. And that's also the collaboration part of this, is that if you do make these things in separate diagrams, you lose the entire collaboration piece, where someone from the security team does something totally bad for the performance or the UX or vice versa, or any of these separate disciplines end up hurting one another because they don't have a common place to discuss what the system is at the end of a year, right? What is this thing going to be at the end of the year? And can I actually talk about overlapping concerns? Because if I make the system too secure, is that going to hurt UX? Is that going to hurt performance? If I make the system too nice and shiny, is that going to cause problems with performance? Is that going to cause problems with security because we're showing information we shouldn't be, right? So there's people that have expertise in different areas. And I mean, if you're going to do separate models for separate concerns, you can just go ahead and use UML. You already have a whole bunch of things, and use, user story mapping. You have a ton of things that can already help you be really good at a specific thing. But the problem with all those things is that it doesn't do it in a collaborative manner. And I think event modeling, by throwing away the how and really focusing on the what is it that we're trying to get, and the why, to discuss the why with others based on those concrete points of data, then we can have a common language. But if you take this and apply UML, then you're going to get into class diagrams, you're going to get into sequence activity diagrams, branching for logic. And we've all been there with UML, at least the people that have been around for more than 10 years, where, an organization tries desperately to keep a set of UML diagrams in sync with the code. And it's incredibly tough, especially that the most, valued, especially by developers, UML diagrams are sequence diagrams. They quickly fall into the trap of just duplicating all the functions and all the methods in their code base into a diagram. Now they've just doubled their work with absolutely no reward, because a CEO doesn't want to see your inheritance tree and all that kind of stuff, right? So this middle part here, the how, is on purpose ignored, so that we have just the right level of insight, which is state and what people see, right? The projection of that state. This is what gets put into the system. This is what people see, all by example along a timeline. And that's enough. That is the middle ground between agile and just absolutely crazy big design up front with every UML diagram fulfilled, or TOGAF or whatever.
Yeah, I think with all of these tools, and the problem with UML is it doesn't allow you to leave information out because it shows up as incomplete a lot of times. But this one is, you only put in the information that's necessary, right? So for example, up here in this thing above the within 2 seconds, you have links to specific screen elements, right? Now, the problem is when the screens change, that becomes a nightmare. So you might just link one arrow to the whole box and say, this screen uses this view, right? But if you need to explain this at the beginning, you would link to this goes to these elements on the screen. And that matters. But for most teams, that's too much detail, right? So it just depends on the situation you're in. If you really want to use this as your screen spec, that's where people want to focus on, you add a little more detailed links. But mostly you don't bother, right?
Yep. So as I say, as people and teams get more used to doing this, they can add or remove as much information as they need. For example, we never needed to do this within 2 seconds. We were quite comfortable with how the application scaled and how fast it was. And the deployment was, on site per client. So the scalability issues weren't there. So we never needed to put in these types of things. But maybe when you're dealing with a really large system, you might want to do that and say, hey, the implementation here needs something, quite tricky. Maybe we need to implement it via CRDTs or something because of multiple people are changing stuff, and we need that level of, merge resolution of those documents, quote unquote. But we can use it to exemplify those things. Like I said, at the bare minimum, you just have the UIs and the events as to what information is getting captured. Now, whether that's in tables or whether that's in events and you're doing event sourcing, that's fine. One thing that we did not go into is, organizing these into swim lanes. So each domain has its own state, and so those events sit in that domain. Further, you can split that even down into sub swim lanes to show here are my entities or my aggregates or whatever you want to use. And by the way, I even though we're all about CQRS, event sourcing, and domain-driven design, I do not use those terms. And one of the core pieces of event modeling is to use common sense and plain language to explain the same things that DDD, CQRS, NES explain. Because if you use those terms, you alienate people. A CEO does not care about the word aggregate and that you have a special thing for it. You just lost them. You just lost someone you should be collaborating with. Likewise, UX people using, cognitive load, etc. I want to say that, hey, someone has to remember this many things from here to here to continue. Does that make sense?
Today's example is invariant. You would never use that to business people.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't like invariant. What the heck are you talking about invariant? And then you have to go explain. So what word do you use instead of invariant?
Well, I would say I have a restriction on how the system's supposed to work, right? I restrict the system that it can never have 8 or more orders. And here's an example of an error that'll pop up.
Yeah. So I would say the same thing. A restriction that must always be true. I have one of these
business rules. Like everyone understands business rules, right? Everyone says the business must operate this way. So how can you give me an example of one of those rules, right? A rule. I have a rule, thou shalt not kill. It's a rule. I have a rule here, thou shalt not have more than 8 orders outstanding at once. And I can show this is what's going on. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I did want to get into more development. I did start to use so I started to work on this exact model here. Sorry, these UIs to actually do this, because I like this idea to have context of what you did the previous day and to then have some maybe fun JavaScript or whatever. I'm going to do everything server side just to make it explicit, but it would be nice to see how this builds up as you enter more and more hours into the system. So that's the change from last time that I sort of introduced, and I want to make sure that that we have a good walkthrough example. So any questions?
No, I just want to point out.
Besides Rick.
I just want to point out a time check. It's noon now. So set your expectations on what you want to
I'm going to do this again on Tuesday. It's a repeating meetup. So we're going to get into more implementation of these things on Tuesday. I need to actually have this running for our company anyway. We got to be eating our own dog food, and so hopefully you'll use an open source implementation of this for your work, and it'll and know that it's event sourced, and you can extend it in these ways. Get all the benefits from that. Oh, we have a couple of Marios here that are missing. Let's put them here. Maybe they're here. Oops.
So what are we going to try and accomplish between now and 12:30?
Well, I can walk you through some of the code, because I don't want an ugly blue, black and white with blue links page. So I was looking at some very simple CSS to drop in to actually have some nice structure. So it's actually visually appealing. I think in these demos, it's always bad to be looking at ugly UI, and a lot of event modeling is about the UX UI component. So I want to take some time to do that. So if we want to look at that, we certainly can. So I was just looking at running this in. Oh, great. Oh, yeah, well, that's what I was doing. I forgot that the live edit was did not support Firefox. It just supports Chrome. So it's just this is a new machine that well, not a new machine, but a repaved machine for all this. So that's the ugliness here. And we don't want this ugliness to exist in this form. So I was just using these pure grids, but I think there's another CSS that's better. So I was looking at Bluma things. Bluma is a very small CSS library that allows you to have some of those trickier things about HTML layouts, such as horizontal columns and responsive design. So it actually looks decent, because when we're going to be using this system, I really want people to also be able to click on links in their email and be sent to a mobile page on their phone and be able to fill this out. So you can really take to heart what event sourcing, when combined with event modeling, gives you for the UX UI experience. And I think that'll be a good way to include a lot more people into doing this responsible way of tracking things. So but since we've gone into that one particular example here of throwing in invariance, and I think the key point, oops, I moved something. One of the key points is just knowing that when you're dealing with given when-thens that encapsulate more than your own aggregate, these are identified with those parameters to the commands that give you those. And it's not just parameters that people type in on a screen. They can come from underneath without the UI as a parameter. But again, the big thing that I've seen come up in conversation quite often is how do you show that? Be explicit about it, or are you succinct about it? And is that enough? So that's the main point here. And I think we ended up talking quite a bit more about, adjusting our event model for showing these cross-entity restrictions. Let's use plain English like we said we would. So there's a restriction on based on what's happened before and a view of what's happened before that we use as an input to how we're going to progress our state of the application or system forward. So questions, we have 25 minutes. I don't know how much I can get into just coding stuff up. I feel that if we have a 4-hour one, we could just hack on it. Maybe next time I'll stay on for another couple of hours to continue with the implementation. I'm not sure if Krzysztof has something to show. Maybe, I'm tired of talking. I can take a bite out of my sandwich here. Well, he shows what he's done, if anything, or anyone else have any questions or other things to talk about?
Sorry if this is a bit obvious. This is a C# application. Did I hear that someone had implemented it in Go, or is that a?
I want to. There is an OAuth project that's written in Go that I believe Jamie Isaacs has done 2-3 weeks ago, and that recording is there. So I do want to have a stack of Go. I mean, he has really good example code. We could simply throw that in, and to review our initial goals, to have these things really. I don't know why this moved down. That's okay. I think I moved it down by accident, but yeah. Right, we can have a .NET, a Node.js, a Golang part, and they share the file system, event store, tokens, views, HTML templates, maybe all sorts of stuff. But the read models and the commands can live in whatever, and we just move them according to a routing table that we have here, a routing scheme that we have in Nginx, to make sure that I'm hiring some Node.js people, I'm hiring some .NET people, and I'm hiring some Golang people, and they have to build the system within the year, right? How am I going to do that without having them fight it out to say who's got the better technology to write the whole thing with? Why can't I just have each person be really good at what each person does and not incur that cost curve problem, right? Or maybe some of them do want to switch to that. I mean, I just think this is a really good way of testing well-defined state transition contracts, so that we know that we can take a slice of this functionality. And I don't care that this command handler is written in Node.js here, and this other command handler is written in Golang here, because my inputs are stored here in a common format in JSON or whatever on the file system, or plugged into event store, or any other technology that each of these stacks can equally access.
Have we decided that part of the stack is it?
Well, currently it's just me and Krzysztof, and Krzysztof is doing .NET Windows style full-fledged web application, and I'm doing the Kestrel low level the Node.js replacement within within .NET, right? So when I'm running this, just to review that, this is the only thing that I'm doing here. I'm not sure if that's too small. It should actually be in presentation mode.
We have one slice in PHP.
Yeah, PHP. Yeah, sorry, we have PHP. Yes, we have a couple of slices. That's right. Yeah, so we have PHP. So we have two technologies and two approaches to one technology that all need their own Docker containers, or at least separate processes to handle those things. So we certainly don't need Docker containers, and I don't think I'm going to bother. It's just going to be scripted up that you run these things, run the Kestrel thing on this port, run this other one on this port, and run the PHP on another port, and we should be good to go. Unless we need a Docker container because it's such a OS heavy technology stack that they've adopted, then you do need to put it in a container, because you don't want to affect your own system that heavily to run all those things in parallel.
But the storage are we decided on an event store database and the views?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We want to leave. So one of the exercises here is that we want to start to writing this in a manner that shows how quickly we can get the implementation with very little code. I mean, this is not even a page of code, right? It's very small, and it's taking care of a couple of views with just HTML. But in terms of the amount of code, it's going to grow. This is just the scaffolding where we're getting things from the form and just testing that we can actually write out the events to the system. But when we have file write all text to this JSON event, that's just going to get put into event store or something else, right? That's our integration point with different technologies, and that's where we're going to have that nice way of coming to this what is the right abstraction, so that we can swap that file system out with a real event store, right? Or implement our own event store, or I don't know, maybe use an opinionated table in a database to be, you know, the storage for all the events. Whatever we decide, we have that in here. Yeah, the layout is, you know, it's just HTML. And in terms of, I'm not even using a templating library. I'm just going to be searching, replacing these things for now with a little, you know, some challenge to implement range for ourselves, right? If I'm going to have a, oops. Oops, over here. If I'm going to actually have some divs for each entry. And in there, obviously, we'll have, again, something like that, which will show hours. And the idea is that you can port this to any tech that you want quite easily. Maybe there'll be a little side presentation on tokenization of these things before you do the search and replace, so that it acts like a proper template. And it's, again, just a demonstration code. In your real implementation, you would switch it out for something that's more mature. You might have a small interpreter that just searches, replaces the source files that have a template to, you know, maybe have single, you know, some of the templating things have single things. Some of them have something like that, right? I forget how many different syntaxes there are, but the idea is that, you know, one time you can write an interpreter if, you know, if these views here are being interpreted by .NET with some specific way, we can have a simple translation layer. That's an OC cost, right? Like once you do the translation once, it'll work for all the different views you make forever. So depending on, you know, what type of replacement scheme you need to have, or how to identify each piece, it should translate directly to whatever scheme your stack supports. And the idea is that anyone from any tech stack can go in and learn about event modeling, contribute to the time tracking project, and not have to switch entire stacks to understand the advantages of doing things this way. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I was just trying to get the lay of the land. That's good.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a bit of PHP. Krzysztof has the other .NET implementation that's a little bit more mature. And you gotta get the camera really further for me. It's like they're staring at my forehead most of the time.
As far as Go, we're waiting for a volunteer to pick up Go and pick a slice.
I want to do it too. I mean, I love Go, and so there's enough code to do stuff and to start anyway.
So
I'm just
if you're
focusing on the
interested,
UI right now.
If you're interested in Go, maybe you might be able to get a start on it and pair with Adam offline a little bit when he's got some time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have any Go.
It's not a hard language, and when you have one or two things done, especially with event sourcing, it's the same pattern over and over again. So you should be a lot more, I guess, confident in making mistakes and learning faster with an event sourced by the slice approach, because these are small, you know, controlled explosions, right? If you look at each slice, you're basically, you know, if you get this thing wrong here, well, it's not really going to blow up all of these things. And when you fix it, it's going to continue to plug in correctly to the rest of the solution. So, Peter, when you were working with us, you had that, that giant amount of learning to do because you're coming in from Java to Node.js, but you got the hang of it pretty quickly, right? You just kind of, relatively speaking, if you're having to onboard an entire stack with ad hoc solutions for every single piece of logic, it would have been much harder. But because we just had this cadence of, this is yet another event handler for a read model, this is yet another command handler for yet another command coming in from a screen. It's short circuits a lot of the learning process, I think, anyway.
The paper slice thing also gave me a really good razor for where to put my energy, kind of thing. So
yeah,
that is a good effect. I'm currently sort of job hunting, so I'm trying to brush up on skills.
Well, you can use this as an example, a guinea pig for whatever interests you, right? What a great way to integrate into a solution that's going to show the benefit to a project for people that are doing other stacks as well. And go for it. If you want to stick around for next time, I think we're going to do a public 2-hour one, and whoever wants to stick around for the entire 4 hours can then just code. I know that Rafael was doing a really good event modeling meetup in Poland, and he had breakout rooms, which really worked well. So he had 20 people in there and made 4 or 5 groups, and Zoom allows the co-hosts to create their own rooms, and people would go out into those rooms and collaborate. So we could certainly do the same thing here. We could aggressively say, hey, we're going to take care of these slices, and this other team's going to take care of these slices. And if there's some common skill set, such as a tech stack, that would be kind of neat to do. So if you have suggestions, let's connect on Slack with coordination for that kind of stuff. It would be kind of fun.
Just something that puzzles me. The actual aggregate code, I mean, that's got to be all done in one language, right? Like
it depends on your implementation of an aggregate. There's a lot of aggregates that end up being just there in terms of the logical thought, but can be implemented as multiple. You'll find this a lot in functional programming or serverless stuff, that the aggregate consists of some sort of state. But even within an aggregate, do you have to, depending on the command you're accepting, are you looking at all of the data that an aggregate sort of has a state for? Not really. So that's where an aggregate kind of falls apart, and you say, well, when I'm doing this command to the aggregate, I only need to look at these few pieces of information. And so my filter for the previous events can actually be a lot more discerning and leave out a lot of stuff. And that's one of the lessons we want to learn here, is that we don't need to have a class or an organization called aggregate in order to do and achieve the same things that an aggregate does for us. There's a functional way of looking at things. Again, aggregate to me has a lot of background in OO type of implementations, where it was really a graph of classes where you really needed to follow tell, don't, ask, stop picking at random classes within that small graph, pick one that's the gateway to do everything. And that way you'll be able to better understand how this whole group of classes changes together. And there's some rationalization to why you're changing things, a common point of focus to see all that functionality and what the inputs, outputs of that graph are. If you look at Eric Evans' book, that's one of the key aspects of that, and it's one of the key aspects that got really helped by Greg's event sourcing work, because it gave a very direct way of implementing that with this very good accountability measure of past history. But in so doing, it also showed just how the aggregate is really crutch to getting functional interpretation of state better. It's a stepping stone. Like a lot of the DDD things that we have are really just stepping stones into a better understanding of organizing information. And so this is why we don't really stick to the aggregate idea in event modeling, and I rather show that done via streams. Now, yes, the streams are tied together by an ID, but the motivation for it is a little bit different, or significantly different, I think, than the motivation was for the aggregate concept when Eric wrote the DDD book, 15 years ago or whatnot, or nearly 20 years ago now. But
well, I mean, I guess I need to involve my understanding of aggregate then, because I always sort of thought it was, how do you identify a little island of consistency in a system that is in general
it is
not too worried about being consistent?
So. I'm not saying it's different than that.
Okay.
Yeah, it still is, and your island of consistency here is in these, given when, then these are bad examples because it's on different orders. So you're dealing with starting a new order, but it's dependent on all these other aggregates and what their state is. So you have to have this projection to tell you what's going on. If you're talking about just dealing with an order and it's kind of lives on its own, this is a different thing. So I don't know. If you look at streams of information, how you organize it, it's a little bit more overarching. But yeah, if you they do have a great this great concept of what a transactional boundary is, like when you're all or nothing operations. So events either happened or didn't. Without event sourcing, aggregates were basically this method on this graph failed or succeeded, right? And that was your consistency, transactional integrity. Here we're a little bit more explicit about it with event sourcing by saying this event either gets put on to the end of the stream or not. I don't know. Is that enough? It's a good discussion. I think we could have a meetup about that, and it'd be kind of nice to have some more, drawings about it.
I guess at some point we have to there is a collection of sort of consistency and fields that would need to commit to one and be given to one particular person or technology. So
this is your aggregate, right? You have these relationships. You have this aggregate root here at the top. And then you have all the other classes that are involved in coordinating anything. This could be, let's just leave it at that. This could be order. This could be your order. And this could be your items. Item. Address. Oops. Why is that? That is not good. Get out of here. What did I press? Okay. I don't want this. Skip completely. What is that? Address. Right, so this whole thing is your aggregate. And this thing here is your aggregate root. And this really acts as your gateway. to changing anything in the aggregate. So your calls always coming in, something like that. My type keeps switching to this. Okay, there we go. Right, so this is how you organize things from the OO perspective, so that you have this consistency. Is that right, Peter? This is
yeah, from the perspective of turning a command into an event. Yeah, it's
well, even without that, even forget about event sourcing, forget about anything like that. Just take, Eric Evans' book. Right. It has none of that stuff in it, and this still makes sense because you don't have a proliferation of code all over the place to fidget with the address or fidget with the item or delivery method directly. You always can see that all those changes happen through here. And when you're changing an address, it does its own thing internally, or where you're adjusting an item on that order, it does its thing. You're not dealing with these exposed classes. And this gives you a nice interface to basically coordinate everything underneath. And you don't really care whether this breaks up into two classes or, gets some other implementation or, gets some other implementation for storing the state. You don't care. You have this nice, this nice interface to work with. Yeah, and this helps. This is just an organization tool, right? And in so doing, it's an all or nothing as well, so that you can change the state in a predictable way.
I guess what I was trying to get at is that if we're choosing sort of different technologies and allowing a number of them, one event, it seems like all events that relate to a particular aggregate need to be in the same technology. Otherwise, well,
let's not even do that with events. Let's do it. How would you do an aggregate in OO way with two different technologies? Well, it would be the same thing as the routing, because you would have, where's my stuff here? Here's my text. Okay, so here I would have, let's just say complete and add item, and then I'm going to take this entire thing and I'm going to copy it. And over here, oops. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do this here, and this I'm going to make slightly different, and this is going to be in a different stack, and I'm going to have start, or actually deliver to, I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to have my state of this thing living in, do I have a database shape? All shapes. Yes, I do. The state of this stuff comes from these things. Right? This is maybe based on an ORM.
Yeah.
ORM/DB. But the interesting thing is about this implementation, when I add an item or complete, am I caring about this? Nope. Am I caring about this? Nope. Here, when I'm doing a deliver to, do I care about this? Nope. What does that tell you about your aggregate?
Okay.
Right? So this could be an implementation in .NET. How am I getting and retrieving the state of this?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to, yeah.
Right? I mean, I can have classes that are partially represented in the ORM of choice, right? I mean, I'll have my own ORM in either of these things, and I can ignore some of those tables over here. So this works on traditional architectures, this idea.
Okay.
But it's not as good. I mean, you're still losing the breadcrumb trail of how you got to places, which makes debugging and finding stuff really hard. It makes migrations to new versions really hard. Migrating a whole database schema to a new database schema with existing production data is an absolute nightmare. I don't want any of that, but this is the traditional approach.
Right, right.
And that was really what you were saying before. Was that really came out of the idea of right, because they were trying to bundle particular because it's transactional consistency, but they were trying to bundle particular operations together in a class.
Yeah, artificially,
right, by some developer's imaginary idea of what that thing was.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that a complete model of this, if you want to play around with boxes and arrows to satisfy some armchair architect, you take this stuff, duplicate it, and then take one of them and just superimpose it, and there's your complete picture, right? Because at this point,
I mean, that seems
you
like
you have a kind of a cool thing happening here, right?
It seems like that this aggregate, then, if it can be modified independently safely, wouldn't having that one gatekeeper be a little excessive? An excessive.
It depends on the invariance. No, hold on a second. Maybe if I have too many items, it affects the delivery, and maybe I do need it. Like, that doesn't mean they're exclusive. But what I'm saying is that no matter which of these things that you're doing to an aggregate, it doesn't mean that you have to use all of the information in the aggregate to make it succeed. It's just ridiculous. Right.
Yeah, I think I'm getting you. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can add that stipulation, right?
There must be at least one operation that requires the entire state, but to actually the operations that don't require all the state at once.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There's definitely operations that will require the entire state. And so some of those things will do that. I mean, I bundled them for complete and add an item, but I certainly can have a whole ton of other ones, and it'll just require the entire, all the tables, all the columns, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. I see what you're aiming at now.
And it's just easier to do this with events. It's way easier to do this with events. I can literally pick from my history what it is that I wanted, right? So plus equals. This is how you kind of dissect. All right. Well, there we go. Well, we're kind of over time, but if there's any other questions, I'm happy to stay on. Happy to stay on and what's that?
So one of my things that I've been reading Greg's event sourcing versioning book and his CQRS documents. Yeah. And I guess one thing that kind of triggered in my head, and I'd like some opinion, is like these operations are really the crux of the system. And it almost seems like prior, because of classes, I don't know if that's right or if I'm wrong there, but everything was based off this class, and they needed a way to bundle these operations to almost make ADTs and interfaces.
Yeah.
And like that event, and now as I look at events and these commands, I find it very enticing because I know I'm too stupid to figure out what lives where at first, and like what could be abstraction. Does that make sense?
Well, everyone is. Yeah, everyone, absolutely. Everyone is, especially if you're dealing with a startup or a brand new project. You just don't know enough about how it's going to be used. And so the best thing you can do is use a system that has accountability built into it, so you can have those breadcrumb trails to find out how you got to a situation. Now, if you have to pivot, how do you transform that information to new things? 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years ago, people were still wondering like, oh, I got the wrong aggregate route. How do I now change my system to work in a different way? Well, that's quite easy these days. You know that there's things like closing of the books and transforming things to be initial events for new types of entities. You just relate them. You don't need to go back and edit things in the past. That's an accurate representation of how you did things. If there's a problem there, well, you know, cut it off and start a new abstraction that works better. And soon enough, those old streams will not need to be online. You know, that's one of those things. So again, the similarity between a traditional system and an event source system is kind of interesting, because if you look at, I'm going to use another shape here just to demonstrate. I like this one, if I can draw it. Yeah. So if we have the state of an application as being different tables changing over time, one more. I'm gonna just do one more here. So we have that, and then we can do this. And then we just move them over underneath one another. Oops. And this is our timeline. I should probably make this entirely different. This is one of the things about event sourcing. It's like, oh, you're gonna have to replay all the events and all this kind of stuff. It's like, nah, no, you're not. Not if you do it properly. It's the same thing as data management with your existing database.
Right, because some of those are going to go out of date. It's like they're just,
well, they are. Of course, some of them are going to. But the worst thing about this is that these relationships are what's going to kill you. Some of the records are going to go back and relate to previous records that were done here. And now, if these are records and tables that span relationships with entities that were done at different times,
yeah,
where can you draw the line to have a cutoff and say, I only need, oops, get out of here. Oh, shoot. Wrong keystroke. If I look at these, and this part of the timeline, the latest part of the timeline, is the one that I want to have as my image for debugging and developing, which is what happens. How can I untie these from here? You can't.
Good luck.
This is why it's always in a traditional system a nightmare to detangle just enough of the production data to be able to debug something. And there's always some debugging tricks that you have to go, oh, it's asking for a table that we didn't actually bring in, or from that record, or this. There's no real way to cut over, or this thing got overwritten. I can't find, you know, it's just really hard to find places. And that event modeling makes this a lot, or sorry, event sourcing makes this a lot easier, because what you have is you have longevity of streams that have happened at different times. Oops. Why is that doing this bookmark stuff? Okay, Control D, please. There we go. Okay, so the same thing kind of happens, but with when you have streams of entities, you can basically have whatever is relevant done in read model references and explicitly say what's still in play. And in this case, you can say we have this one still at play, And we have this one still at play. Oops. And we have this one still at play. And maybe this one. So that means I can have these ones to, you know, move in. But these ones I don't. So my time box for what I need to debug something is quite clearly defined. And if you expand on this over time, where you have let me just show two more examples of where this is going, because this touches on just how much you can do for even hot, lukewarm, and cold data in terms of where your servers are keeping what data for how long, if it's relevant. Actually, I want to just copy that. Oops. Did I group these together? Nope. Okay. So this and this. Add certain streams are totally out of that. And so what you have is you have your, as your system lives, you have things that are always available and in play and have to be duplicated to your live cluster. Then you have stuff that moves to spinning Rust and cheaper things to keep alive. These ones here, they're lukewarm. These streams are lukewarm. They can only be like, well, that's when you get like your, I want my last year's report from my bank. Okay, well then sit here, wait for this report to come up in 2 minutes. You're doing this once a year for taxes. It's not something you do for your daily banking. And here's if you're in legal trouble, they have to spin up these are your dead ones. These are the ones that have to come off of tape backups or whatever else when the bank is legally compelled to, or you paid a significant price to get those historical data sets, right?
Right.
Which is easier? This or this? I'd rather be dealing with this down here any day. Those interconnected things are absolute nightmares. And if you've been dealing with any kind of legacy situations, trying to decipher just what those tables hold, but not only that, but what do they link to within the same tables or other tables as to how stale that information is in that particular column, in that row, you have no clue.
Yeah,
right?
that makes complete sense. Yeah, because I actually ran into something similar at my current position where they built up this huge relational structure and they got it wrong in the tables. And I said to them, well, has the business process changed? Has your process in the business changed event-wise? Like, if you look at this, and it's no. And then it kind of dawned on me, like, well, if they would have event sourced this, it's just a matter of perception of state at that point, and they could have rebuilt the views of how they wanted them. And it really was like, oh,
yeah,
oh.
That's exactly what I found in my encounter with event sourcing. It's, if you find a bug, you could fix it, and in a lot of cases, there's no effort, and it's like it never existed. So the bug, that is, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully this gives you some more ideas of how to move forward with these types of systems, and that, more importantly, it doesn't require any heavy tech. And this is why we're being stupid on purpose. Like, I'm not putting in a library to do our templating by default. I want to do search and replace so people aren't puzzled by what's happening here with that view data. I don't want to put in event store so that people understand that, oh yeah, that's a system.io file write all text. Oh, that's a JSON serialized thing. That's it. It's just information moving from place to place. And we can talk about it quite intelligently with everyone across the organization. And then, further up, can we talk about the entire system and how it makes sense to everyone, including, these specific things about SLAs and UX, UI, testability, QA, product ownership, roadmap, how much are we done, project management, can we have these slices as our stories and replace estimates with just having velocity based on how quickly, on average, we create command handlers and event handlers. That's worked really well. So anyway, yeah.
I think this is awesome. I'm really excited about this stuff. It's helped me personally just understand the systems, like event modeling it out and knowing what they're doing, or knowing like where the information is coming in and what is using it. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think the important thing, of course, if we go back to the article, to get everyone across the line to see this, we need the traditional systems because we're in an echo chamber of people that love DDD and all this other stuff. We need to talk with using these terms. We need to show the coupling using tables, right, over time. Yep. And just show people that these events are just information they're throwing away. It's the delete part that they have because they're taking a shortcut because there's a well-established framework that they're going to use. This is what you're paying for. This is what you're paying with, is that you don't have this track. At least you show them with event modeling that this is where your coupling is. This none becomes this number, and then if they do another verification, if the first one failed, it gets overwritten. I have no record of that previous verification unless I make an explicit table, historic table or whatever, or I start to treat things like transactions and I get these tables that are actually a lot better that, are additive only. And then, oh, interesting. This additive only is kind of cool because I can see what I had before always. Yeah, interesting, right? And you start the conversations this way about being more accountable with your information. You naturally say, well, why don't we just keep these orange things around then?
Yeah.
So an easy transition.
Yeah, I love what you said in that first article about, in 1956, the 10 megs was what versus 30. Yeah, I mean, that's gone. That's a bygone era.
Yeah. But we're still trying to squeeze out, be as efficient as possible. And then we deal with this mess here, right? It's this kludge of just, I don't know which record related to what record at what time. When can I cut off which backup is going to give me enough information to get an 80% chance of fixing my bug? What a horrible proposition.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, oh, you know what? This is a real serious bug. I'm going to have to, spin up a really expensive machine and get all of the production data on my machine to debug that for you. I mean, I worked in places like that. It's bananas. But it's like, no, that's going to take too long. Just fix it in production. What?
Yeah, I'm there.
You kidding me?
Yeah.
And then how do I know that I didn't screw up? Well, we have last night's backup, right? But what about the users that used the system this morning? Oh, I don't know. Better start writing some checks.
I don't want to live in that world anymore. It's it's painful. It is painful.
Yeah. I don't either. That's why this is really the red pill from the Matrix. It's once you start working this way, you cannot go back, and it's really, there's no other option for me but to move the whole industry forward. Otherwise, I'm out of work.
I honestly
think I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's gotta. I mean, there's so many benefits, and it's so much easier to think about, especially for information systems. It just makes sense.
Well, most systems are information systems. Right. That's why I say, like, oh, where would you not use event sourcing? I was like, well, it's like
99.9.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you can, if things are getting out of hand, of course you can start to, cold storage some of these events if there's too many. But, this closing of the books, you notice that these streams, I don't have one of these down here that's I don't have any entity in here that's too gigantic, right? Like if I scroll across, I try not to make them, this long. I don't want to be replaying 5 million events to get a projection right. These cutoffs, whether at the end of the month, if this is fintech, are important. I do not want an entity that lasts this way, even if there's no, way to think about it. Like this is something that just can continually add things. Well, just chop it off artificially, either after it gets to 1,000 events or after it's been alive for more than a month. Just cut it off, start a new one. And that's what's going to rescue you from this argument about having to go back and replay things, right? So
that's an interesting point. I don't want to occupy too much more time, but that reservation thing that you're talking about earlier to achieve maximum number of outstanding orders, that to me sounded like a very long running aggregate.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is where you would just cut it off. It's really it's arbitrary,
Yeah, exactly. After this, maybe we just hold it to a history of the last 1,000 reservations and just start a new reservation entity, right? Oh, that one ended. Like we as soon as you're full, like you go back to pen and paper, as soon as that filing cabinet is full, what do? You get a new filing cabinet, or you move some of those records out somewhere, right?
Would
Same
you
kind of thinking.
Would you possibly use the time to live on those events?
You could, but I mean, I think you're free to implement whatever fits your domain best. And sometimes it just may have to be arbitrary. And it's just, I just don't want to deal with a situation where something goes wrong in production and I have to sift through more than 10,000 events. It could be just that. Like, is it part of your operations? That if I'm going to debug a problem in production, am I sitting there sifting through 5 million events because I never closed the books on this entity?
That makes a lot of sense also from a system migration point of view to a new version, right? You don't have to...
Well, that's exactly why these things have to be decipherable. This gives you blue-green that's capable. If I include this long one here at the bottom, there's a client of ours that had, the warm-up time for the events was 2 days, 48 hours, because they didn't do this. It's nothing special. It's not a technical issue. It's about being responsible with your information. Like, you need to be able to deploy how your organization runs just like you would a traditional system, right? If I'm migrating from blue-green with blue-green here, how do I do that? Do I have a schema change? These are nightmares in this case. Here we have an opportunity to actually have them done incredibly intelligently, where we can start to have our day-to-day stuff moved over within seconds, and all the projections that we need are populated within seconds. Switch it over, start to point to the lukewarm storage. If someone has that extra functionality that they're looking at, maybe they will get that tomorrow or whatever, or it's just acting slowly because these projections can be done on as needed basis. Some of them may be things that look at the entire history, but those are always going to be expensive no matter what your system is, especially if it's brand new logic. So it doesn't matter if you're here or here. Those things for tax purposes for 7 years ago, there's a mistake with your interest that you collected, and you need to pay the difference to the government. Well, that's going to be a long report. I guess I should label these so if someone drops in that wasn't attending this week's thing, they know what this is.
No, so far the biggest hurdle I've seen is developers stuck in the dogmatic way that they've been doing it for. Yeah,
it's unlearning. Exactly. Yeah. And there's so much tooling that people are experts in and don't want to throw away as their investment of time to be, to be really well trained in that and demand a higher higher income and all this kind of stuff and justify their jobs. There's a lot of this. A lot of this is entirely nothing to do with tech. It's entirely to do with the mindset of people that you're working with, the type of organization you're part of. All right, so that's that. I don't know what else is. I think the other things are. I guess I can just call this none. People will understand what this is. I don't have to type up anything else. Okay, yeah, but one of the things I want to do in Blender is make animations of this, right? So I want to show a timeline as someone's using an application and how the tables get updated, etc. And just move this sort of transparent piece of glass that shows the current things happening, but then show a history of what's being left. And then mark with red markers where things are getting overwritten without history of them happening. And then do the same thing with the event source system. So if you can imagine a pane of glass moving through space, painting the history of what a traditional system does versus what an event source system does. And that's kind of a, I have eventsourcing.org and eventsourcing.com that I'm working on. And those are going to be the first animations that people can walk through. And, people are complaining about not enough instructional videos on even the event store website. So I'm just taking it upon myself to actually make those videos, articles, and the meetup to just have the opportunity to explain it to people and go through the problems. And this was kind of a big one. I think today I wanted to focus on this. Because these projections from other aggregates and how they play into a command for a specific aggregate, how they're actually instrumented, how you explain that to the business people, how you explain that to the developers and testers and everyone else, right? And there's in a sense, I think I haven't made this observation more announced, and I think it should be. I think what's going on and why we have these to-do lists in event modeling, the idea that you should be tracking things with these views. This is understated. A lot of this reactive domain stuff, event kicks off a command directly. It's just a shortcut that's hurting event sourcing and event-driven architectures. The how this gets kicked off by a subsequent thing, this little gear, is incredibly important. This combined with this is one of the most underrated things in event modeling, underrepresented. And the absence of these things leads you to buy off-the-shelf middleware to do this complex thing for you, and it's the biggest problem with shoving responsibility off to something that you should have responsibility for, thinking that some magical middleware tool will do this for you with your best intentions. And being able to interject from how does an event get across as a command that's kicked off is the last bit of magic that needs to be removed from information systems. This projection is key because it tells you why and how this link happens. Because I could show this. If I don't do event modeling, this is what people do. They erase all this, and this happens directly. How? Why? What evidence do I have that this happened? Does it exist in a database somewhere? How do I make a screen for that to show what it is? This is one of the worst shortcuts, right? This is horrible.
Is that like I have encountered that sort of situation where you go, well, how does this, cascade on? And I did come across the process manager pattern, or I think it used to be called Saga. But
yeah,
that's what
it is. This is a shortcut you'll find in storming. You'll find it in a lot of places. You'll find it in things like automation. I guess you even had it like in BizTalk back in the day as just little functoids you could put in. And it was, oh, that's just a little detail. And then your functoids actually grew like a cancer to be their entire applications, right? Like it's a horrible history. This shortcut is the devil in the details. It needs to be explicitly written out, because when you show this red thing as what the developer must make, they don't stand on anything concrete to base their estimate upon. There is no concrete thing that they're basing it on. Whereas if you have this explicitly said that this is what's going to happen, you have a number of views and commands that you're going to implement, and that goes straight back into your velocity counts, and you have the size of the project. Without that, you have this mysterious red arrow that may or may not be working the way you want it to be.
Just for clarity, the cogs up the top, is that like the process manager that I've encountered?
It's really arbitrary how you implement it. By default, think of it as an automated human. Like it's just a human. If there was a really, really boring job out there that you could assign it to someone, or you could mechanical Turk it for 5 cents an hour to, somewhere in Africa, you would, right? That's the way to think of these things. They're actually actors that are looking at these as to-do lists. It's really important to have that, because you can start to talk about what this view is and what the SLAs are. Remember that 2-second thing with the red arrow? I can put that on here, right? And that tells me whether this thing is literally the next line of code after this read model gets updated. It just calls a specific, synchronously calls a specific class that's called a processor and passes its own state as a parameter. And that then ends up doing a command, a call to a command, or issues a command to something else, right? But so it's independent of the implementation. It could be right now, right there, implemented as the last line after the update of this read model. That's just an implementation detail. But the information changes from here to here to here to here. That's how the information changes. So the implementation doesn't matter. I could have a cron job every 5 seconds reading a file. That file has this information. That's fine too. That's my 5-second SLA, and I can show that with an arrow here. Right? We're kind of like batch, they can be batch jobs, etc. And in fact, this is how we communicate across different boundaries within computer systems all the time. Even your network stack is a buffer in memory that's just waiting for those packets to get sent. It's this little green box on a very low technical level, but it is a little green box. It's sitting there in memory at some point.
I was going to say, because that's almost like a decoupling between, because with that red arrow, you're kind of coupled there with that read model.
It has a lot of assumptions. It's very implicit. It's not explicit at all, right?
Yeah.
You can give it a fancy name like a policy or whatever the hell you want, but it's not telling me much.
Right.
I don't want a purple sticky saying policy here. I want to see what the information, what information gets moved as to, and why, what I call these things. What do I call these parameters in here, and these rows and columns, or whatever I have, whatever structure I have? What names do they have? What name does this have? Right? It's really important. When I do this, I miss out on saying exactly what's happening. I can't give a name to any of those things.
Right, because that's almost like your inflow and outflow in general systems thought, where like that green is like a stock, and that thing's going in, and that generator's taking that outflow and lowering that to-do list.
Yeah, but not necessarily introduced another pattern to hold in my head and perhaps even measure what the velocity is for these things.
Okay.
If I do this, now I have another thing to measure, right? This allows me to decompose all these different intricacies to just event handlers and command handlers. Always. It's just this, and they always connect in this order. So now I have way more data points to count and get my velocity from.
And it's consistent.
It's consistent. It's like, well, how do I do this processor? Well, it's the same way you would do an actor. Like, how does your person here click this button and it makes a command? Well, this cron job will just issue this you know, it's a little bash script I have that might just curl the API here. You're done, right? Same pattern. Whether it's a human here touching a button or whether it's this cron job that's spinning off this API call through curl. Identical, right? Whereas with this, it's like, well, I don't know. What information? How does it change? Why? Where are the names? Anyway, yeah, I should probably label this as well.
Wrong.
Well, it would be the evil shortcut, right?
Yeah.
Is anyone else really interested in getting good at Miro? Like, I see Adam doing this. I'm like, oh, I want to be able to do that.
I bought a subscription, and I have to get time to.
I'm wanting to switch from Miro because I want a free. It's really expensive, and I feel it's hurting people that are not as well off as we are in the West. And so I'm looking at Draw.io because that can be self-hosted on Nextcloud, and then I actually want to have volunteer my server to be that for different people. The only problem with Draw.io is that the hosted one doesn't yet have collaborative stuff, but it's coming. The code is there. They actually tweeted at me where the code lives, and if someone can cludge that into Nextcloud, it's done. That's the minute I move, because then you have a free option for people that can just spin up a $5 DigitalOcean droplet or host it at home, poke a firewall, a route through their router, and it's free, and you're done. At this point, you can include, you know, everyone around the world, no matter how economically challenged they are. They can start to think and talk about systems this way and collaborate with people remotely properly. So,
I know.
So there we go. And yeah, like Greg says, make the implicit explicit. Greg has some other patterns that he talks about, which I just dismiss as yet another read model, but he calls a lot of these things as fulfillments. So this green document will actually have a number of specific entries, such as this must be done, this must be done. It's like a very specific manifest of things that need to be done that changes as different processors act on it. So a lot of times when you hear Greg talking about this pattern, he refers to it as a fulfillment document, which is just another read model. But I don't want to get that granular. I don't want to have event modeling that requires people to have a whole lexicon to remember. Like, we're getting away from that. We're trying to make things simple. So it's always this view, this command, this event, and these screens. That's all we have. We have a very simple set of patterns, a very limited set of concepts to remember. And if we just stick to those 4 core patterns, everything will end up being spelled out in a predictable way. And it's kind of a tedious thing sometimes. Like, I've had event modeling sessions where like, oh man, this is so tedious. Like, yeah, you're actually seeing what your system's doing. And it is tedious. And maybe some of the parts that you have are complex, but don't just shove that off to like, oh, the developer will magically solve it for me. This is your information and how it's treated. You own it, right? It's not a technical problem. The same thing would happen with pen and paper.
Yeah, because I was rereading some of that Fred Brooks stuff, and I forget which one I think it was this No Silver Bullets one, and like in the first couple pages, he talks about like the biggest problem is the specification, not the implementation in the languationlanguages. I thought,
exactly.
Man,
yeah. No, he's brilliant. I was lucky enough to get a response from him when I emailed him about including him in that article. So it was nice enough to respond. He's very busy. I mean, he's like in his 90s now, but just what an awesome set of insights to have so early on in this field, right?
Yeah.
So he saw so much of this back in the 60s, and it's pretty cool. He briefly worked with Mel Conway in that Mythical Man Months book. So that's kind of how I came across all his work, because it really did drive a lot of Mel Conway's work in terms of how he wrote about computer-human interaction and some of the things that he's doing for automating screens. and
Now
doing
that
all
you
that
say that,
data binding work.
Yeah, he did mention R.W. Conway. Oh.
Yeah. Mel Conway.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, look it up. Might be a different Conway, but Mel Conway is Conway's Law, and he's worked briefly with Fred Brooks.
Okay. Yes, I do have his. I binded his article as well.
Yeah, Mel's still quite active. He's still writing long PDFs and articles. I think he's switched more to political stuff, but certainly in the last couple of years, he was still doing quite a lot of human-computer interaction writing.
Check that out.
Yeah, it's how you keep yourself young. You just keep learning, keep doing stuff.
Well, we're keeping you. I'll shut up.
I think yeah. So I think that's I think I noted down what everything is on this thing. I think everyone else can get what these things are. Oh, thanks. Avoid long-running aggregates. Yes. /streams.
Yeah, sorry about the debris above it. I couldn't work out how to delete that line.
Yeah, it's all good. And entities. There you go. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There might be more things to write about, but yeah, that's good enough for now. We're kind of polluting our original event model here, but that's okay. I think it was a good discussion to have with you guys. I hope other people will listen to it and understand some of these.
Well, I will be sending it out to just about the 200 devs in my company. So
yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get it out onto YouTube today at some point. Zoom takes a while. I guess everyone's using Zoom, so their servers take a while to process the recording, and I hope that they don't cut down on the quality, because sometimes this stuff is hard to read if they do a lower resolution. So hopefully it's usable. At least a chat's good.
Yes.
Okay, I think we lost Rick because he does stuff with his kids.
Yep.
At this point. Okay, cool. Krzysztof, did you want to show anything from your bit? Share your screen with some of the stuff you did? Or are you still suffering with Docker pain and .NET?
No, second Christoph helped me. And I have and I have Docker containers.
It works?
It works, and he slice.
Oh, good. Yeah, that was the last meetup. We had some issues getting .NET working with Docker on Krzysztof's side. On this machine, actually, last night I had a lot of issues with getting .NET Core installed because it's not a Ubuntu 2004 PPA doesn't exist yet, so I'll have to be manual finagling, but I got it to work just at tail end of the night, and then have to wake up for this. So I'll code some more. I want to start using the time tracking thing for our company too. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that the reason I chose, before we leave, where are we here? This file system as the first implementation is because I want to just share the directory with the events just through a regular Nextcloud file share, and then have scripts or whatever other functionality to be very easily bolted onto this. So not just different .NET stacks, but if I want to do some sort of a crazy custom report, I can spin up a little Node.js thing or just use Bash or JQ to do an incredibly fast walkthrough through all the files. And then if I have them named appropriately, that'll be enough indexing, for example, week number of the year or something, just some rough stuff to just get a good subset of them. I could do a whole ton of stuff for reporting just on the command line and automation and all sorts of different things. So keeping it in the file system makes it incredibly accessible just by having a replicated node that sits on all of your machines through something like Nextcloud. they're all immutable files, right? So replication won't be a problem. So, no merge issues with those files. I'm looking forward to that because it'll start to really show how we've been kind of pushed into the SaaS model. Everything that you do is conveniently behind a web page, but then if you want to do anything with it, it's like pulling teeth. So I want to show the opposite of that. Cool. Well, anyway, any more questions? Any more things you want to talk about? No? Okay. Well, that's good enough. I think we covered a lot of things today. Unfortunately, I wanted to show more code, but this new machine took a bit of time yesterday that I had allotted for this, and I'll continue. Krzysztof, did you want to show anything?
I can show.
Okay, good. Then we'll see more code. That's good.
Maybe not code.
I can take a bite of my sandwich.
Adam. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
This is Docker Compose, and I start 3 containers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can show events. This is the one folder for 3 containers. And I don't know where is the web page. Okay. And we have Nginx for routing. And Christoph preparing a simple page. So wrote, for example, creating the project. And when I submit the form, I should have event. And I have event in JSON.
Perfect.
Okay. And I can use another slice, another container to approve or submit timesheet. Okay, and I should have 2 events, and I have. And every container is saved to that same place, and you can make interaction from these JSON pipes. It's really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, is the Docker, that's the deployment method? That's the packaging method, is it? Or, I mean, I'm trying to understand why Docker is involved here.
Because we can organize the starting the system and get the slice together. I don't know.
It's not needed, Peter, but it makes certain things easier. Like if like I said earlier, if one of the stacks requires like IIS or some other heavy technology to just serve up pages, I don't want to have that on my system, right? Especially if I don't have the same OS, like or things like that. So,
so this is
the Docker container allows you to be quite free with your implementation and tech stack choice.
So Docker are all the different tech components using Docker, or just some of them?
You could have a combination for sure. You don't have to have Docker for everything, but Docker Compose with the Nginx front is probably the easiest way to do it. You could certainly have Nginx just in Docker and then glue it via ports to an outside system where you have something else that's running maybe in Kestrel without Docker. But, tomato, tomato. It's just processes running somewhere.
Right.
And I use Angular for front view. And in backend, I have .NET Core application. And I use Mediator library to handle handle commands like XQRF and just save file in JSON format, serializing object, the JSON. Really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Only one command per slice, one command handler, but we don't need CQRS, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And events, really simple event. And that's it. The most problem with slice was with containers, configuration, and preparing the base of the solution in .NET Core and Angular. Only this. The rest of code I can copy paste to another slice and just use.
Yeah, thanks. It's off. This is off.
Oh, do you want me to put it in the microwave or do you want to drink it cold?
It's fine. It's cold. It's fine.
Okay, and that's it. It's very simple.
Yeah, the only thing that's interesting is we're going to have to either interpret events in different formats because we're all doing it separate ways. But I think it's an easy refactoring to come up with something that's friendly. And given one of the goals of this is to be as transparent, I might get rid of some of the GUIDs or transform the timestamps to be human legible, and even have them organized in subfolders for different things, or maybe some more naming that'll make it easier to parse for, you know, what timelines we're looking at, and then also look at the role of different timestamps, because you may be late by a week, or you were on vacation and you forgot to add a couple of days that you worked before you left, and then you might have already gotten paid for that pay period. How do you now add retroactively, and how do you mark each time thing as being paid for, etc.? So it'll be fun. And I guess, Peter, you could do a Java version.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm in a position to contribute, but I just wanted to know how it was all going together, and potentially what reusable code I could pilfer if I wanted to write something else. But
there should be tons. I mean, I don't know how usable it is in production, but it'll be a good starting point for some of the opinions that you might need to have to do event sourcing correctly. I mean,
I'd really like to do some in Elixir, but I don't know if I have the bandwidth.
Yeah, well, thing is, you know, time boxing things to just, you know, 15 minutes. I mean, Krzysztof's stuff, every day he does 5 minutes on his on his Pomodoro implementation in CQRS. He does a 5-minute segment. I don't know if you have seen his stuff on YouTube. It's in Polish, but the model is in English, and he's got links to everything, and he just spends 5 minutes a night. And over the last 6 months, has been able to develop an entire Pomodoro application using event sourcing and event modeling.
Nice.
By himself, right?
Awesome.
Nice.
It's probably a total of 2 or 3 weeks of work for one person, but spread out over that time. So
it's more like a modular monolith application, because I don't use, for example, Docker. This is one application. I use it.
And that's okay. Not everything needs to be distributed. So
yes.
Yeah, so we should, I think on the event modeling page in the resources, yeah, it is. Krzysztof's videos there. You could follow him and find his channel easily from there, and put more pressure on him to finish more things.
I want 1 year because every day.
Is it 1 year for the 5 minutes?
Yes, 1 year. I want.
Oh, you want to do 1 year? Yeah, I thought
to.
it was 6 months ago. So you got another 6
Yes,
months.
6 months, but and another 6 months.
Well, that'll be probably the best Pomodoro application ever.
I think not.
I imagine you're actually mulling the problem over during the other times of the day, right? So you actually end up with a pretty mature, thought out system.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, that's what I want to do with the time tracking thing. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we went way over time, but that's okay. I'll upload this, and Adam, I hope the people at your company like the interaction and the project and learn something from the event modeling thing, and let me know if I can help in any other way. I do like a 1 hour lunch and learn for free. So if you guys have your own specific questions about your own domain, hit me up and I'll arrange a time to do that for the people that are interested in your company.
I will definitely try to make that happen.
Hey, Adam,
awesome. Well, yep.
Do you have like a Patreon page or something?
No, I probably should.
There's a lot of people in Vancouver probably owe you a beer or something, right? It's just you got to monetize that somehow.
Yeah, I was considering that, and I don't think I was considering it seriously enough until I got this rig going. Simply because I've been on the road so much with doing the in-person tours and conferences, etc. But now the lockdown kind of showed me that I can get a lot more done here, and having a proper desk and not having to go to the office all the time, and meetups physically, etc. It's allowed me to do a lot more. So yeah, maybe I will. I'll do that if people want to, shoot me $3 a month to keep this kind of effort going. Yeah, I'd be super happy. Then I'll start to add more, Patreon specific benefits like one-on-one sessions and, an afternoon with your organization or something like that. Yeah, and then share more and more. But there's lots to do still. I mean, the whole eventsourcing.org and eventsourcing.com have to be put together. More articles that are coming in from other people now have to go into eventmodeling.org, and so more people are helping, so that's good, but it's still a lot of oversight. I have a few people that can, thank goodness Eurydice did a good job of making a theme for the site, which was really cool. So we have some contributions for that, and once people start to contribute, it'll be a lot easier for me to, concentrate on doing these kinds of things and producing more and more, not just me now. So it's good. But yeah, I guess Patreon's a lot cheaper than hiring me. So
I don't know. I'm just grateful for what you do, basically.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. I do it for free. So if you love something, you do it for free, and just payment kind of sorts itself out later. All right. Well, on that note, I will start a Patreon page to see who actually wants to push me with money into doing more, and see how it goes. If it doesn't work, and after a month or two, I'll shut it down. But maybe we're onto something here.
Okay. Rightio, guys.
All right,
thanks
guys.
a lot for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. See you on Tuesday. We'll continue on with more of the development. I'll be able to walk you through some of the more immature approach that I'm taking than extra stuff has. And we can compare the two and make them work together. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you.
Soon. Bye. See you next week.
Bye.